From simple woven fabrics to luxurious brocades, velvets, fine embroideries, textiles were the basics of life in the early Muslim world. Islam has been called a textile society because you didn't need chairs or beds. Life was lived directly on the floor, which was covered with mats or carpets. In this 13th century manuscript painting, one man sits on a low folding stool while the other sits cross-legged on a raised platform draped in red fabric striped with gold, while leaning against a large bolster. They wear richly colored robes trimmed with gold embroidery along the sleeves. It's interesting to see how textiles provide both the clothing and the furnishing. Of all the art forms, textiles cross the social spectrum because they include expensive goods for elite patrons, but also plain cloth for ordinary people. Textiles clothed the human body, but also covered walls and floors. Even in Mecca, toward which daily prayer was oriented, the sacred Kaaba was draped in thick black fabric embroidered with gold. Muslim artisans gained fame throughout the world for the variety of their textiles as well as the beauty of their patterns. Woven, embroidered, and knotted with an endless array of designs, they were made of wool, cotton, linen, and silk, and even glittering threads that were wrapped with silver or gold, as we see in this Persian velvet. There was considerable exchange within the Islamic world, but textiles were also important commodities sold to others. For example, in the 17th through 19th centuries, the English sold woolen cloth to Iran and hungrily bought up fine Persian silks, which they greatly admired. Many words in English today derive from textiles made in Muslim workshops. For example, muslin comes from its origins in the Iraqi city of Mosul, and damask comes from Damascus. Cotton is an Arabic word, and seersucker is a Persian word. These words are linguistic signs of the Islamic origins of textiles that had a global reach. However, one prized fiber, silk, came from elsewhere. The silkworms and secretive silk manufacture were smuggled from China into Central Asia and eventually Byzantium, sometime around the 6th century. The highly prized fiber was then embraced by Muslim artisans who soon excelled in growing and working in silk. This 10th century textile is a very early example of Islamic silk. Although only 2 pieces of it survive, we can see that it has figural imagery. Elephants face each other on a dark red ground, while a caravan of camels forms the border. Textiles lend themselves well to geometric patterns because of the way that they are woven, with the warp, that's the vertical or longitudinal threads, and weft, that's the horizontal or lateral threads. And yet, as we see here, figural scenes were also represented, and also inscriptions. One highly valued kind of textile in the first several centuries of Islam was tiraz, a fabric embroidered or painted with a band containing the name of the caliph, or ruler. The word tiraz literally means inscription, and it refers to a type of Islamic textile made with a calligraphic border. Tiraz may have begun with the practice of stamping the caliph's name on coins, but soon the caliph's name was painted or woven in gold on the hem of robes that he bestowed as gifts of honor. The earliest tiraz textiles date to the early 8th century. In this slightly later example, the inscription states that it was made in the city of Nishapur in 879. Inscriptions like this are very useful for dating textiles. The early tiraz textiles came from the caliph's workshops, but by the 12th century, as the royal monopoly was relaxed, tiraz became a term for any rich fabric with embroidered bands of inscription. In this scene of a caravan of pilgrims on their way back from Mecca, we see that the figures wear turbans, striped leggings, and robes edged with gold lettering. Even the camels and horses are draped with tiraz fabrics. One of the reasons why textiles are so exciting to us is that today and in the past, clothing is one of the primary ways that we can express our personal identity, that we can externalize it and present it to the people around us. Another important category of textile was the carpet, which could either be flat woven or thick raised pile. Often called knotted carpets, pile carpets don't have true knots. Rather, the threads are wrapped around the warp yarns and then pressed into place between the interlacing weft yarns. A carpet made this way could have as few as 50 knots per square inch or as many as 1,000. Knotted carpets existed before Islam, but throughout the Islamic world, weavers quickly became adept at pile carpet making. For example, Eleanor of Castile, when she went as a bride from Spain to England in 1255, brought in her trousseau pile carpets from the Islamic kingdoms in southern Spain. When we look at Islamic architecture, we must imagine the floors laid with thick carpets such as this, the walls covered with hanging cloths, and cushions and mattresses as furnishings. Small rugs could be unrolled and used anywhere to designate a place for prayer. This textile universe is dazzlingly evident in this manuscript illustration, where even the architecture is made of fabric in the form of tents. In a desert encampment scene, the bustle of activity is paralleled by the profusion of brightly colored and patterned textiles. Flowing robes worn by people, tents with medallion designs, bold stripes, and floral patterns. Even the camels carry lovely textiles. One wears a black cloth adorned with colored flowers under its blue saddle. Textiles were the most actively traded item in the Islamic Mediterranean. It's important to realize that Islamic textiles were traded not only because their quality was so fine, but also because there was so much textile production. You may notice that I often say Islamic rather than Muslim. With these two terms, I'm distinguishing between the word Muslim, which refers to Muslims who practice Islam and things that are specifically religious, and Islamic, which is a broader cultural term, which can include Jews and Christians who lived in Islamic kingdoms, actually with safety and protection and harmony. And they might have spoken Arabic, they might have worn tiraz fabrics, they might have sat on piled carpets on the floor. One sign of this interweaving of different cultural and religious groups in Islamic society comes from the Geniza papers found in Cairo. The Geniza was a storage closet of manuscripts, commentaries, letters, and legal papers, basically anything written down, that was found in a walled-up section of a synagogue in Cairo. They had been stashed there rather than discarded because they all contained invocations with the word God, a sacred word to be treated with ritual respect. The papers were a wonderful modern discovery because they recorded the ordinary commerce of the Mediterranean and Middle East, extending as far as India from the 10th to 19th century, connecting Jews, Christians, and Muslims in economic relationships across long distances. What we learn from the Geniza documents is that textiles were the most actively traded goods, and that regardless of the cultural destination, Islamic textiles in particular were greatly esteemed. Textiles were simply everywhere in the Islamic world, clothing the body, covering the floor, hanging from walls, and yet the stuff that was actually used the most doesn't survive. Cloth was made of organic materials and was actively worn and used, which means it was soon reduced to rags, eaten by moths, or ripped up for reuse as smaller pieces. Few old textiles survive intact. From 16th century Iran, this handsome silk velvet with glittering metallic threads was once part of a robe or drapery. Its scenes of falconry, a courtly pastime, plus the sumptuousness of the fabric itself indicate that it was worn by a prince. But today, all that remains is this 3-foot-long fragment. One of the odd ways that some precious Islamic textiles did survive was in tombs, where they were used as burial shrouds. Prized for its vibrant patterns and colors, Islamic cloth was even used to line the interior of Christian reliquaries. Those are boxes containing the bones of saints and martyrs. The fragment with elephants is a case in point. Made in Iran in the 10th century, it was obtained by a Frenchman during the Crusades who brought it home and donated it to his church. In the 12th century, the silk cloth was then used to wrap the bones of the church's patron saint. The Shroud of Saint-Just, as it is called, is an outstanding and extremely rare early Islamic silk textile. Textiles are interesting as objects of trade, products of technology, works of art, and cultural artifacts. One of the interesting things about textiles is that many of them were made by women. And so, although we don't have the names of the actual artists, we do have the kind of living remains in the form of the textiles that survive today, works that were made by anonymous women a long time ago.
Islamic Art Spots are a presentation of the National Endowment for the Humanities. Bridging Culture's bookshelf, Muslim Journeys, is a presentation of the National Endowment for the Humanities in cooperation with the American Library Association. Support for this program was provided by a grant from Carnegie Corporation of New York, with additional support for art and media components from the Doris Duke Foundation for Islamic Art. To further explore the Islamic Art Spots and the Bridging Culture's bookshelf, Muslim Journeys, visit the Muslim Journeys website